talk a little bit about ways to individualize approaches to the writing process. And it should come as no surprise to anybody who's ever taught writing that breaking a writing assignment into a set of incremental, manageable steps or procedures is one way to deal with the fact that so many of us get overwhelmed when we look at a writing assignment that is looming over our heads, and to avoid being parallels by the enormity of it all. If we can break the assignment into a set of steps or stages, we can just focus on each step at a time and hopefully make the whole thing happen. And so writing process instruction has been part of writing instruction all over the United States for a good many decades now. And I know when I moved to Vermont in the early 70s, I kept hearing talk about the Vermont writing process, and I thought, wow, cows, maple syrup, what's special about Vermont? Well, it turns out the Vermont writing process really did not differ from the writing process I had encountered in Connecticut and New York State. The idea that there was a practical framework for teaching writing to all levels, and we started with usually something like brainstorm or generate ideas, take those ideas and organize them into some coherent sequence, start drafting, draft again, revise, edit, draft, publish. Those are the elements of the writing process, and the Vermont writing process really was no different. There's a good body of research that suggests that this idea of breaking the act of writing into a set of manageable steps is actually very effective. This goes all the way back to the work of Flower and Hayes in 1981 when they first started talking about the cognitive process theory of writing. There's that word cognitive, and it's been supported by research by various researchers in bilingual settings as well as English first settings. And in their wonderful book, study Writing Next by Stephen Graham and Perrin, in 2007, they looked at the effect size or the strength of the effect of various tools or approaches for writing instruction, and they did find that writing process had a very respectable amount of impact in improving writing. And but it's important to remember, the Vermont writing process, the Connecticut writing process, although they have a lot of elements in common, that actually are writing, there's no such thing as the writing process. And if you stop to reflect how your approach to writing, your process, would vary for these kinds of writing tasks. Email to a friend you want to meet for lunch. For an insurance form, describe a special piece of jewelry that's been stolen. Write a letter of application for a summer job. Write a research paper on the politics of international adoptions. Write a travel blog for friends and family back home. You're going to really adapt a very different kind of process for each one of these kinds of writing tasks. So I want to make the point that the writing process is not only going to vary from individual to individual, but it will vary a lot according to the dimensions of the task that frames the writing process. And my colleague Sarah Glennon thought that she came up with this quote: instead of teach a writing process, teach a flexible, recursive, strategic, and individualized approach to writing process. And one of the ways we can do that is by presenting models of the writing process that are a little more realistic. The typical writing process has us going from planning in a lockstep way to drafting and then on to revising. And in fact, the way most writers actually work, we've got a very recursive process. That is, we go back and forth between planning, we do a little drafting, and then we say, no, I think I need to reorganize this idea. Maybe it has to come after that idea. So we go back to the planning stage and we're doing some kind of revising as we go along. And it's actually very recursive, very reciprocal. And so it's not just a linear process. It's also helpful to remember that 21st century writing process includes some elements we may not have seen in earlier models. And one thing I particularly like about this model is that it puts the purpose of writing clearly front and center. So when we think about sitting down to write something, the very first thing we should be thinking about is the purpose, and along with that, the rhetorical situation, in other words, the audience, as well as the setting. Am I writing for a journal, a newspaper, a scholarly research project, a letter to the editor? The rhetorical situation is going to have a huge influence on the approach and the content of what I produce, in the format certainly. So knowing what the rhetorical situation will help me choose the medium. Is this going to be a personal essay, a scholarly essay? Am I going to use footnotes? Am I going to write informally in the first and second person? So after we've thoroughly examined the context, the overall context of where and why and for whom a piece of writing is being generated, then generating ideas. But of course, as these double arrows indicate, there's every element of this really is reciprocal and recursive, and we can be going back and adjusting all of our ideas and strategies as we work with the material. So we generate ideas and we transcribe or write them down in some way. And, it involves revising and editing, but also in the 21st century, designing the format. Again, is this going to be a blog? Is this going to be digital essay? Or is it going to be hard copy? Or, how are our readers going to encounter it? It's very different to write, even if you're writing for Cosmo magazine, if you're writing for Cosmo Online, the formatting and the style is going to be distinctly different than if you're writing for the print copy. And then finally, publish. And that doesn't always mean publish as having a contract with a publisher, but it means presenting in some kind of public forum your writing for someone else to read. And even with these multiple or nonlinear models of a writing process, we want to remember that the individual is going to vary in the process that really works for them. So we work kind of from the inside out. And one of the first things we realized working with our students is that there tend to be two kinds of ways people approach basic writing, getting their ideas organized for writing. Some of us are drafters. We learn what we want to write about as we write. So we free write, we generate a lot of text, maybe pages, we scribble notes to ourselves. And as we write, we reflect and dig into ourselves and discover what it is we think, feel, and want to say about a topic. So it's a kind of like organic discovery process. Others of us are planners. We like to have the whole big picture, sequence of ideas, relationship of ideas clearly laid out in our mind before we begin to write any sentences. So we might start from an outline, or we might start from a graphic concept map representation of our key ideas and the supporting ideas and how they relate. And neither of these is correct. They're both correct. And they may vary from person to person and from task to task. You might start with free writing for some kinds of writing assignments, and for highly structured, if you're writing a book, probably you're going to need to start with some kind of idea of structure so that you don't keep repeating yourself chapter by chapter. And part of the process, since we know getting started on writing is such a big deal for so many people, we want to be able to create routines for getting started, for activating to write. And there's a student, if we want students to be able to identify the purpose of an assignment, then as instructors, we want to clearly spend some time up front talking about and discussing and examining the purpose of an assignment. If we want students to begin a writing process that actually gets them going on the writing, we probably want to offer a variety of writing process strategies for them to try out. If we want the students to break the writing process into some manageable steps or stages, we will model that in the way that we give out an assignment, and I'll show you some examples of that. And if we want students to be able to, again, work incrementally, setting themselves some small achievable goals, we will set interim deadlines that prompt the writing to move forward. And so some particular routines for helping students get started. Here's a visit from the procrastination muse, by the way. She says, "Look, you look tired. Why don't you take a nap?" Or, "You need to do the dishes right now. Don't forget to call your mother. You'll think so much clearer after a run." So some of the tools that we use to get a student started on writing: journal writing, and everyday in-class journal writing to prompts or self-selected topics, creating a kind of a storehouse of ideas, topics, phrases, images that can be pulled out when we have an actual assignment. Certainly previewing assignments in class and encouraging students to think about how long is this, how long is it going to take, visualizing where and when they're actually going to begin their writing. And probably the most valuable strategy of all is to have students begin the writing in class, whether it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Because typically if you give an assignment and say, "Are there any questions?" there are no questions because students haven't grappled with the difficulties. But if you begin in class and students begin to say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize, don't I have to do some research here, or maybe I have to gather some quotes before I begin," then the difficulties will begin to present themselves and you can start to discuss and strategize around them. Deadlines are a big issue, especially for students with executive function. Most of our Landmark College instructors try to use deadlines strategically because of their power to stimulate action. There's nothing like an imminent deadline to provide cognitive and emotional fuel for getting started. So actually, more frequent deadlines multiply that impact. So requiring students to produce stages of writing according to a tight schedule has actually prompted many procrastinators to complete their work incrementally. So the big final project may be due next Friday, but by Tuesday you're going to require some kind of a work plan. And by Thursday, a list of resources, and by Monday a draft of a first paragraph, and so on. And you can give students feedback, or they can work and do peer review to give each other feedback. So therefore deadlines need to have teeth with consequences. While most teachers are willing to accept late work, students may still lose a specific number of points calibrated to the degree of lateness. And that's worked quite well in a lot of our classes. When we work with students who are chronic procrastinators, probably we need to build in some flexibility. One approach that I've used is to have a firm deadline but be willing to negotiate an extension if a student approaches you in advance, say a minimum of 24 hours before a paper is due, to explain where they are in the process and how much longer they're going to need. And that puts the responsibility on the student to be candid about their work habits and to problem solve and plan for action. Another, set of, hold on. Process strategies are around getting stuck. What do you do when you get stuck? And so there's just this list of things you can do, like use a set of questions, start a fresh page of free writing, go to a different section, go from handwriting to computer or vice versa, keep track of your random tangent thoughts. One of my favorites, take a meditation break, take a walk, write. I like to write standing up, change locations, change the music. I like this one. Say sometimes when you feel you're spinning your wheels, you may actually be winding up. And certainly paying attention to whether you're feeling understimulated or overstimulated at this point, and choose your strategy accordingly. In terms of revising, I'm going to do a part 2 of this little video that will deal with revising and some innovative strategies.